All right, is everyone admitted? Can folks on the line hear us?
Yep, I can hear you, Dan.
Wonderful. Great. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So just getting everything situated on my side. Great. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to today's listening session on the White House Office of Management and Budget's exciting new public participation and community engagement request for information. That's RFI. My name is Dan York, and I serve as the director of the first ever U.S. Open Government Secretariat, which sits within the U.S. General Services Administration, GSA. Just to get things started here, two things real quick. First, this event is open to the public and is being recorded. A copy of who attended the event, the agenda, notes from the event, and the recording itself will all be posted publicly on open.usa.gov in the coming weeks. Also, a quick word from our legal team. The purpose of this listening session is to encourage broad public input. However, GSA does not intend to use any individual or collective opinion expressed in this forum as guidelines in the formulation of any specific agency policy or regulation. Okay, back to our program. I'd like to thank you all again for coming today and take a moment to briefly situate this session within the broader direction of where we're taking open government. As many of you know, last summer, as a part of our commitment to the Global Open Government Partnership, OGP, which the United States co-founded in 2011, we established the U.S. Open Government Secretariat under the umbrella of GSA to lead and oversee domestic implementation of our membership in the larger OGP organization. The Secretariat has a multi-part mandate. First, we're tasked with leading the federal efforts to identify, implement, and report on existing commitments outlined in the U.S. Open Government National Action Plans and actively collaborate with American public to shape them. We're tasked with maintaining engagement with U.S. civil society and members of federal, state, and local governments across the country on the principles and values of open government, including transparency, accountability, and public engagement. And it's that latter point that brings us here today to discuss the groundbreaking efforts undertaken by the White House to broaden public participation within the federal government. We're eager to hear from you about the approaches that would be most beneficial to you and the communities you work with. The Secretary is very pleased to co-host this listening session alongside our White House colleagues in the Office of Management and Budget, the Domestic Policy Council, and the Office of Science Technology Policy. We deeply appreciate this robust federal collaboration in advancing the public engagement and open government agenda. This work aligns with the key priority of the Global Open Government Partnership under the new Open Government Challenge, pursuing, quote, policies that create expectations of higher level public participation within the policy-making process, establish new mechanisms for participation, and or create best practices for improving public participation, end quote. We at the Secretariat are immensely excited by this joint White House GSA effort and look forward to continuing the engagement with you. As we start, please list your, there we go, change slides. Please list your name and organization in the chat, as well as your area of open government focus. To keep this interactive, we'd love if you keep your cameras on and list your organization and your video name. There's 3 little dots next to your name. If you click that and change name, you can change how your name appears so that everyone knows where you're from. In just a moment, you'll hear from our GSA administrator, followed by brief remarks from our White House colleagues. And then we'll move into a brief overview of the PPCE RFI, and then we'll spend most of our time talking with you and collecting your questions and feedback. And with that, I have the great pleasure of introducing our GSA administrator, Ms. Robin Carnahan. Get us kicked off.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, and everybody for joining today. I'm Robin Carnahan, the administrator of GSA. Really pleased to be able to be here with our colleagues from the White House Office of Science and Technology and Domestic Policy Council. I know we have folks from the Department of Commerce as well as OMB. So thanks everybody for being here. And Dan, thank you so much to your team and the whole Secretariat here at GSA. You're doing a great job. And all of our civil society partners, thanks for dialing in. You know, we're here today to really just try to continue some important conversations on what we can be doing to create a government that is more transparent, is more accountable, and it's more participatory. So I will say that throughout the course of my whole career, those fundamental principles have just shown up again and again in any kind of democracy. We see their importance every day in the Biden-Harris administration. I've certainly witnessed it in my career, the importance of transparency and accountability and participation, particularly when it comes to elections, both in my prior role as Secretary of State in my home state of Missouri, but also in work I did with the National Democratic Institute, where we partner with civil societies all over the world to promote citizen participation in democratic elections. So I get this. And I also get that as important as these principles are, we know that every generation has got to recommit to them. And nowadays, given the speed of change in the world, that means being able to adapt and apply those principles even in this fast moving environment. So what I want to talk a little bit about today is our plan to be more intentional and active in seeking input on how we can do better in setting priorities and implementing decisions and reporting out about progress that we're making. So let me start with a report out. GSA is really trying to do our part on this whole open government agenda. Many of you may know that, as Dan mentioned, that we set up the Secretariat at GSA last year. It is a new and permanent team. That means we are committing talent and resources to implement this across the government, and we're building a structure to do that, not just for now, but for the long term. So that feels good. Second, the midterm self-assessment report of the U.S. Fifth Open Government National Action Plan is, as Dan said, out for comment right now. It's in the Federal Register. Really hope that you will give it a read, give us your feedback. I signed it myself. I'm told that's the first time a GSA administrator has ever done that. So pleased to put my name on that, and I would like your comments so we can make sure it reflects what we value. And then finally, I hope you saw last week that we at GSA are standing up an Open Government Federal Advisory Committee. Now, this is important because it's not only a new committee, but it's going to be advising GSA on all of our open government initiatives. That means the creation and implementation and monitoring of the next National Action Plan. And we wanted to, create a formal space for folks in and out of government who care about these ideas, get your advice, figure out how we can build on the existing programs. And so that, I think, is really important. We're going to be soliciting insights about what the next National Action Plan should look like. And particularly, I'm interested in knowing how we can improve public engagement and stay responsive to all of these changes that we're seeing. So I hope you all will get engaged either by submitting a nomination to that committee of yourself or by recommending others who you think would really add value. Those are the three asks. Like, look at that midterm assessment, consider the advisory committee, and look at the plans that we put out. I know one last thing that OMB is right now shaping up a new federal framework for public participation and community engagement. Dan mentioned it. It's aimed at helping federal agencies be more broad and do more meaningful engagement when they reach out to members of the public, including and especially underserved communities. Comments are due back on that in the middle of May. I think it's the 17th. So please check that out and be sure to respond. Bottom line in all of this, we can only be successful if you all partner closely with us, the private sector, our NGO colleagues, and reflect the values that we care about as Americans. Building a feedback loop between us is going to be the best way. In fact, I actually think it's the only way that we're going to make real progress. It's the only way we can rebuild trust in public institutions that are strained here and all over the world. All of that can only happen if we really commit to a partnership. So I get that sometimes these are hard conversations. None of this is easy work. Every generation has to go about it again, but it is important work. It's worthy of our lives. And so I just want to say thank you all for doing this. Never easy, but we know that the impact is huge. So again, thank you for your time. I know other folks from the White House and the GSA team are going to be here for that throughout the conversation, and I look forward to getting a readout about all of it. So I'm going to have to sign off, but Dan, I'm going to hand it back to you and look forward to hearing how this all goes.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll make sure to do exactly that. And thank you for your time and commitment to open government. We really could not have done it without your support. Great, so back again. Now we're going to pass it to Mr. Justin Vale with the Domestic Policy Council. Take it away, sir.
Thanks so much, Dan. My name is Justin Vale. I serve as Special Assistant to the President for Democracy and Civic Participation here at the White House Domestic Policy Council. The Domestic Policy Council is charged with helping to coordinate efforts across the US government, across agencies, to develop and implement the Biden-Harris administration's domestic agenda. And so I focus on advancing policies that strengthen and protect American democracy. Public participation and community engagement is an important pillar of that democracy agenda. It's an honor to be here alongside all of you here today in pursuit of our shared goal of making government more transparent, participatory, and collaborative. I really want to thank my federal colleagues, especially Administrator Carnahan and the entire GSA team for strengthening our capacity to support open government. Because from day one of this administration, President Biden has prioritized demonstrating that democracy can still deliver. That democracy can still tackle the greatest challenges of our time and meet the needs of American families across the country. To do that, we've been working on creating better mechanisms to receive direct feedback and engage with people, organizations, communities, local governments, particularly underserved communities that have often lacked a voice at the policymaking table, because we're working to create a pluralistic, multiracial democracy that serves all Americans. Democracy has always been a work in process, a work in progress, and it always will be. But at this moment in particular, we are seeing backsliding, we are seeing direct attacks on democracy, and as Administrator Carnahan mentioned, a lack of trust, a decline in trust in government, institutions, and in one another. One key solution to that is making it easier and more accessible for all Americans to engage in the work in government. Strong relationships are built on transparency and communication. The research shows that. On the other hand, we know that when institutions engage meaningfully with the public, we can improve transparency and show that these institutions care. So it's not just about listening, it's about acting, following up, and developing those ongoing relationships. At its best, this process can create a virtuous cycle of civic engagement, where the citizens who perceive that their engagement matters, they are empowered and they become more likely to become involved in other aspects of their civic life, helping to foster civic health across communities. And so the White House, we are committed to engaging in meaningful ways with civil society. We take pride in the progress that federal agencies have made to date in the open government space. Today, the work you're going to hear about from OMB really reflects an important step forward, but we know there's much more work to be done. We hear you on that, and we'll continue to work in this shared goal together. So there's going to be opportunities for public involvement as we continue. Your engagement will inform the administration's thinking today, but more importantly, it will enhance our efforts to spur lasting change in the structures of the way that we work for and with the American people. So thanks again for your partnership. With that, up next is Sam Berger, my colleague from OMB, who will tell you a little bit about why this work matters so much to OMB and how it's building upon our efforts that we've started since day one. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks so much. Really great to be back here with everyone. I'm Sam Berger. I'm the Associate Administrator at OIRA. And as I think a lot of you know, OIRA, among its many responsibilities, has the role of managing centralized review of agency regulations. As part of that effort, we were focused on how we can get more public participation into the regulatory process. And not just more meaningful public participation, but earlier at a stage in which agencies can really take account for it. And the reason is that greater public participation makes the regulatory process better, helps agencies understand how to better prioritize. It helps agencies get relevant information that they don't already possess. It also helps them create more durable two-way relationships with stakeholders that can help them on an ongoing basis. And so as part of the effort of developing that guidance, we wanted to engage in a participatory process as well, which is what brought me to calls just like this. I guess it was more than a year ago, and a chance to hear from you all in listening sessions and in writing. And then to talk about kind of what you had shared and why and how that had influenced our guidance. And I thought it was a really an incredibly helpful process to the development of our guidance. A lot of great ideas came on. I think they were Zoom calls, they might have been WebEx, but definitely meetings just like this from some faces that I actually see on the screen right now. And that was just incredibly important to really landing some meaningful guidance that we put out last summer, guidance that talked about some of the pitfalls and challenges that agencies face, that individuals face in getting involved, set forth leading practices that agencies were already using or should be considering, set up the regulatory agenda, the unified annual twice a year agenda as a time for agencies to reflect on the work that they were doing and to share it with you all. So a lot of the ideas that were in there came on these calls or were refined, discussed, strengthened because of these calls. And that's why I'm excited that we're here now to talk about sort of an even bigger effort, right? How do we take this sort of approach and apply it federal-wide? Because while here at OIRA, we love regulations, there are obviously a lot of other really important things that the federal government does as well that would equally benefit from that kind of public participation. And so that's why having this kind of framework, having a common language, having a common set of leading practices, having a common way to talk about this will help us and hopefully help other components of the federal government put out guidance, figure out how they can be bringing more people into the process, how they can be creating meaningful engagement, how they can be creating durable relationships. But it all starts with calls like this, right? Getting feedback from you all, hearing your thoughts, pitfalls that you've already started, and hopefully places where you think people are doing a good job that we should be talking to right away. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Chappie, but just say this is really great, and we'd be lucky if at the end of this process we have as much benefit, as much expertise, benefit from as much expertise, understanding, and improvement as we had in the OIRA process. So just really looking forward to hearing from you all, not just now, but through subsequent opportunities for engagement. So with that, turn it over.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. And hi, everyone. I'm Shaibia Dalal, and I serve as the federal lead for equity and engagement within the Office of Management and Budget. And it's really great to be back here. Last year, along with Sam, I had joined a session, I think it was last summer, to really talk about what was just a very, very high level idea of something like a framework. And we were asking if that was even an idea that resonated with you all. So it's great to be back with a much more fleshed out concept that we are officially and formally soliciting input on. Next slide. You've already heard this, but just to recap, we are working to develop a government-wide framework for public participation and community engagement activities, doing this in partnership with members of the public, with agencies, and the goal is to enable agencies to more effectively, more broadly, and more meaningfully involve all of you and your communities in the work of government. And just as a reminder, when we talk about public participation, community engagement, or PPCE, our shorthand, and activities, that means things like notice and comment process, processes, consultations, requests for information, crowdsourcing, really any activity that's carried out by a federal agency to consult with the public in order to inform regulations, policies, program design, and other actions. And much as OIRA did last year, as we are developing this framework, we also want to model good behavior, which means involving you all and agencies on the front end of this process as we start out and providing multiple mechanisms to submit input, which I'll go over in a little bit. But for this stage of the framework, again, we are accepting input until May 17th, but we will do our best to consider feedback that comes after that date. So next slide. So Justin, Sam, the administrator, all touched on this a little bit, but why are we doing this? You heard about how the administration has really focused on PPCE, but that's not unique because PPCE is encouraged and required in a wide range of statutes, executive actions, and policy directives that span administrations, which is why agencies today engage in a variety of actions to really connect with those who are affected by the government's decision. And this is powerful because these activities are a reflection of the fact that the work of government affects people's lives on a daily basis. The problem is that we often do these activities without using what might be considered the best possible array of proven tools or methods to reach those who are most impacted or even generate the kind of feedback that would be most helpful to agencies. For something that we do a lot, permitting, grants, policy development, all of which require engagement, we lack a common terminology, framework, and understanding of the most effective tools for participation and engagement. And we don't have a consistent framework that can help agencies think through and understand what forms of outreach or engagement make sense for specific activities and goals. So there's more work to be done to make sure that agencies are hearing about people's lived experiences, what's happening in their communities, and making sure that we are able to share tools and approaches for more robust PPCE, but also earlier and more consistent PPCE. So next slide. Everyone before me touched on this. I don't need to tell this room that meaningful and equitable public participation and community engagement can really help agencies to better understand the problems that they could address and then develop solutions that are responsive to the public's concerns. There's a lot of potential here in terms of how we can improve designing and delivering policies and programs in terms of who we reach, when and how we involve them, the perspectives that we use to inform decision-making, and how we really build on successes. We're hoping that this effort can really enhance the participation and engagement activities that are already underway at agencies. In addition to the OIRA guidance, there's also other guidance that OMB has previously issued, which this framework can really help augment. Next slide. So what are we seeking feedback on? There are three buckets. The first is the experiences that individuals and organizations, including from underserved communities, have had in engaging with federal PPCE activities. So what's worked well, what the barriers are, and how we can make it easier for folks to engage. The second is around content to go into this framework. So things like tools, metrics, leading practices, and other frameworks that we should be looking at as models. And then the third is about process. What steps should we take to involve the public, including you all, underserved communities as well, in co-developing this framework? So what do you want to hear from us? How and when do you want to work with us? And how can we continue to engage you over time? Next slide. Once again, have to plug performance.gov/participation, which is where you can find all of the information that you need to provide feedback. There are three different ways that folks can submit input to us. The first is through an RFI at regulations.gov. The second, and this is a new method, is that responses can be submitted through a simple online form at performance.gov. And this asks the same questions as the RFI, so you can use either. And then the third approach you all are already utilizing because you are here at a listening session, and we'll be doing just a couple more before we before we get the deadline for submissions on May 17th. And then next slide, which will be my last slide before we move into discussion. Just very quickly, one more exciting thing that I also wanted to share on the PPCE front, which is a public challenge. because as we're developing this framework, we also recognize that it's very important to improve how agencies are able to evaluate whether and how the participation and engagement approaches are actually effective. And so there's a new multi-phase challenge, concept papers, the first phase, that's due May 21st. And then we have phase 2, which is a toolkit and case study, due on August 2nd. And OMB and GSA are offering up to $195,000 in cash prizes to help us really make sure that we can assess how effective these approaches are being. Great. So next slide. Great. Thank you all for bearing with us. You know, there was a lot of talking in slides. We're ready to move to the listening session portion of today, and we'll be here for about the next hour. There's 3 portions. We'll focus on experiences for about 25 minutes. Then we'll have a section that's on content, and that'll be moderated by my colleague, Jennifer Lewis, who is Senior Advisor for Open Government at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And then Dan from GSA and the Open Government Secretariat will close us out on process for 15 minutes. You can put your questions or comments in the chat or use the raise hand feature to raise your hand and enter the queue to speak. If for some reason you do not have access to chat, you can also email your question to publicparticipation@omb.eop.gov. And then if you enter the queue to speak, we'll invite you to unmute yourself. And once you unmute yourself, you can share your question feedback. We ask that you do it in 1 to 2 minutes, if you really can, to make sure that we can permit as many people as possible to participate. And if you've already spoken once, then we ask that you wait until the queue has been completed before you raise your hand to speak again. Cool. And now it's on logistics. So let's dive into the first segment, which is around experiences. So there's 3 questions on here. We want to know from you all what the federal government is doing well when you or your organization or communities that you represent have participated in or tried to participate in public participation and community engagement activities, open government activities. And then what challenges have you faced? What are the things that we could do to make it easier or more likely for you to actually participate in some of these activities that inform our decision making? And then what can the federal government do to broaden and diversify our reach, especially to people and groups who may not traditionally engage in these activities or respond and may be missed? So I'll pause there, and I see Stephen is first in line. So go ahead, Stephen, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Steve Buckley. I'm with the U.S. chapter of the International Association for Public Participation, which is very well known for creating the spectrum of public participation, which you can Google if you're not familiar. Yes, my experiences, I've probably been to most of the gatherings ever since the President Obama created the Open Government Initiative on his first full day in office in 2009. So it's been 15 years. And so I have a lot of experiences, which I'm not can't capture 15 years all in a minute or two, but I will say that there was a lot of excitement in the very beginning, and it just slowly over the past 15 years petered out, for lack of a better word. There was a lack of commitment, a whole lot of action plans, which is an implementation plan, and a whole lot of documents, but those are output and they're not outcomes. The outcomes that we're trying to do is improved transparency, improved participation, etc. And we haven't decided how to measure those, because if you don't know where you are now, then you don't know where you've been, then you don't know where you're going. And to me, the program has done a very good job of avoiding how to measure itself. So ironically, the program that was reaching out for good ideas about how to reach out to others itself did not model it. So I hope this is better, because if it only comes up every 15 years, I might not be around next time. So I look forward to that, and I have more about content and process later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. And I will go to Bitsy next, and then Justin.
Thank you so much. Am I off mute? I think I'm off mute. Yes, I am. Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you for having us all here today. I'm Bitsy Scary. I am Public Citizens Regulatory Policy Associate. Like my colleague who spoke before me, I have been to many of these as well. And I can see, just as Sam Berger mentioned, how these listening sessions, they really do influence and impact the reforms that have been made, especially to the regulatory process. I saw comments myself and my organization and my colleagues made reflected in the guidance on public participation that OIRA put out for federal agencies. And by the nature of my work, I'm always thinking about public participation. I know this isn't just about regulatory process, but that's kind of my wheelhouse, but I have some ideas that also span more broader across federal government. So I'll take a moment to share those with you. So first of all, and I know this can be a bit tricky, I've raised this before, but if we're talking about civic engagement, I feel that there's an education component to that. So I do feel that there should be some form of civic education on a public facing level. There's also the educational component in schools, like K through 12 and even beyond. I think there should be some sort of curriculum. Something else I know that influences public participation and how willing folks are to participate is corporate influence, and how the idea of, you know, what's my voice really going to matter? Corporations have so much influence. Now, I know this administration has done a really great job of working to mitigate that and to counteract that perception, but still there is that floating around in the public, that this discouragement around the influence corporations have when it comes to influencing policymakers in the federal government writ large. So I think addressing that can go a long way to build trust and assure people that we care about the public's voice, not just the voice of corporations and corporate special interests. Just a few more things. I also think that it would be really great if at White House press conferences, someone spoke on this. I don't know if it would be Kareem Jean-Pierre or like Sam, yourself, somebody else, the president, just to get this in the public's ear, things that the federal government is doing that we want to hear, that they want to hear from people. I think just putting that out there, just having a voice from the government. I think somebody in the chat just agreed with me perhaps on this. I think that'd go a long way. People do still tune in, or also this goes to media coverage. If people aren't watching live on their TV or streaming it on Twitter, it will get picked up by the press and be in outlets that people will see. Oh, I'm getting more +1s. That's fabulous. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the live support. Also, social media. One of our fabulous agencies, National Park Service, is a great example for you to model. They engage with the public on Instagram. They're funny. They have such wit, great presence. They're like a brand in themselves, but they're an agency. Highly recommend you talking with them, talk with their social media teams to work as you think about ideas of how to take some of their great ideas and kind of spin them around to work when we're talking about increasing public participation. So reach out to National Park Service, talk with their folks. Also really important that information is available in languages other than English. This is so important. I'm talking Spanish. I'm talking about the most spoken languages in the country. That is so critical, because how are people able to participate if they can't read, if they can't understand? So making sure this is accessible for people who don't speak English. And finally,
Thank you, Mitzi. I'm going to cut you off only to make sure that we can get, but these are really great points. So please do be sure to also submit them through performance.gov so we can make sure that it's, emphasized through that venue as well. But thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'll go to Justin next. Oh, I think Justin may have disappeared, in which case we'll wait for Justin. Oh,
can you get me? I'm sorry, I was on mute and I was talking.
Yes, we can hear you now.
My name is Justin Magruder. I'm the Chief Data Officer for Science Applications International Corp. We're a U.S. government contractor. And I've been focused for most of my career and recently on supply chain information. And my question is really somewhat pedantic. I'm trying to find out whether this forum and initiative will extend to state and local governments. Because in terms of standards for sharing data, protocols for exchanging data, we find that state and local governments have many different approaches to this. The federal government has gotten pretty good at standardized data distribution and sharing, and I'd love to see this go forward. But we noticed that state and local governments often have paywalls, or they have constraints and competing formats, and it makes it difficult to work with their data. So a bit of a tangent there, but thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Mark, and then Daniel.
Thank you. Yeah, mine's really simple. Regulations.gov and e-rulemaking were some basic projects of mine when I was at OMB. And what we found when we did the public surveys, actually Center for Excellence in Government did the survey, was that this is very much a citizen engagement tool of the information age, and it changed our perspective a lot. There's a lot that needs to be done on regulations.gov and e-rulemaking to let people see what other people have commented on and vote. The biggest fear, which continues to be a fear of the agencies as I understand it, is that they're going to get millions of comments and they can't deal with that. And in reality, I think what the studies show is you get many times a few comments. If we could see that, if people could see what others are saying and vote, maybe modify, I think would simplify the burden on the agencies and improve the two-way street notion of what we were trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you. And thank you so much for holding this forum. It's a pleasure to participate. I've got 4 points, but they are quick, and I promise that I will handle them quickly. The first one is, it is great that you're holding this event. Part of what would make encouragement for civic engagement to be more successful would be for calls like this to be coming, I know there are folks from the White House, but be coming from the president, or to have folks like the role that Norm Eisen used to play during the Obama administration, so that there is someone who is both senior and close to the White House, and this is a clearly communicated priority of the White House, and one that is communicated regularly. Second, so we're in the process right now where OMB is formulating the budgets, I believe, for fiscal year 2026. Look at, as you're looking to hire staff, having people to help organize communities, to help do the outreach. It's, if you're particularly looking at underserved communities, it's going to be difficult for them to connect by the nature of their circumstances, but there are affinity groups that exist. Make sure that you've paid for the personnel to be able to go and find and engage in those communities, to translate things such as like what's in the the Federal Register, so that's something that folks can understand. Third, people are in constant communication with their government. There is information that is received all the time. There are all sorts of demand signals. Everything's from requests through FOIA, through requests through the press, through letters that are sent to the White House, through letters, communications that come back to the agencies. This is an indication of where there is public interest. This is a, if you're looking at trying to engage with where people are, look at what they're already communicating or trying to communicate, because that is a good way to figure out demand signals. Fourth, and finally, I know that this is kind of anathema, but the legislative branch receives millions of communications a year from constituents. Now, I understand that is a different branch of government, but people are in regular and constant contact with their members of Congress, and their members of Congress have tons of indication of what is demand. And some of those demands are then communicated back from Congress to the agencies. I'm having trouble with Social Security. I care about this environmental issue. Try to do a better job of breaking down the silos and looking across the agencies and looking at matters thematically and topically to try to figure out where those demand signals are coming in. I appreciate you all for holding this forum. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes from it. And thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Daniel. And we'll go to Arfa next, and then Evan and Roshan.
Yes, hi, thank you. My name is Arfa Alam. I work at the Partnership for Public Service. Our mission is that we are committed to a better and more equitable federal government and a stronger democracy. Today, I'm commenting really just as an ordinary American, though. I am a first-generation Muslim American. My husband has Parkinson's disease. My kids are autistic. I have a disabled sister. I am involved in many community organizations at the state and local level that advocate for all of those communities I just mentioned, which and those communities, as you all know, they definitely fall in that underserved and marginalized umbrella, which I believe are the communities OMB is trying to reach. And none of the organizations that I'm involved in know about any of this work if it weren't for me being in this space and sharing these things with them. And when I shared the recent RFI announcement with them, most of the people I shared it with, they didn't understand the announcement at all. They couldn't understand what PPCE is. They really didn't understand much of the text. So I think the feedback mechanisms, they really need to be simplified. Like the language needs to be a lot simpler. And there needs to be, I think, much more targeted outreach to community organizations at the grassroots level, to community centers, to these like umbrella organizations that represent these, many and diverse, marginalized and underserved populations. And I have to give a big +1 to what Betsy said at the beginning, like language accessibility is so important. Elevating these things in the press is so important. And I think the third piece of it was the education component. Thank you so much for the opportunity to give feedback.
Thank you, Arfa. Over to you, Evan.
Thank you very much for doing this. My name is Evan Lotus. I'm with the Program for Public Consultation at the University of Maryland, and we conduct public opinion research broadly on how people feel about the democratic processes and national surveys to see the policy preferences, specifically on federal policy. And one tool that we believe can help to improve the government's public consultation methods, especially with regard to that last point about broadening and diversifying reach, is to incorporate the use of representative samples into public consultation. This would give a lot more people a voice who don't necessarily have the know-how or resources to usually take part in notice and comment periods. And it would also, generally what we've found in our research, it would give the public a lot more confidence that the people as a whole are being listened to. These can include surveys like the surveys we do, where we give people background information and arguments for and against policies, but there's all types of innovative democratic techniques that have been developed using representative samples. And something that's easier is you can make the language suitable for ordinary Americans, and you can also conduct them in multiple languages, which is a lot easier. And with surveys, you can make them available through also the regulations.gov site. So we just think adding that tool to the toolkit would help go a long way in instilling confidence that the government is listening to the public as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evan. Russian Europe.
Hi, my name is Rashawn Bliss. I am the Democracy Innovation Strategist with the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. The things that I wanted to add are really about how I think that there is a whole world, a whole field we know, because NCDD is an association of people who do many different forms of dialogue, deliberation, public engagement, that there are so many practices that government could be using to get deeper and more informed input, like what Evan was just suggesting. There's a myriad of public consultation sort of set pieces that are in person, utilize representative samples to get broader cross sections of the public's opinion. And I really want to advocate for the offices you represent to genuinely consider trying some of these things like citizen assemblies, citizen juries, the sort of small to medium-sized group settings, in-person conversations where people are supported by facilitators who are neutral to genuinely deliberate on questions of the day. And very importantly, that the output, the kind of final results of those sorts of public consultation need to be shared widely with the public from the government. A really key part of the public consultation process, and what I think you all want to do with public participation, is to also not just show the government what the public is thinking, but show the public what the public is thinking. Because when we can hear ourselves, see ourselves represented, that push, that impulse that a lot of folks feel to go out in the streets and protest because they're not being heard gets lessened, because it's like, oh, there's my opinion right there. And I can actually engage more deeply and see how much that's done. I also want to really deeply recommend that you all look into platforms like Polis and other AI supported ways that people can use digital tools and digital participation to kind of help aggregate and join together and deliberate on and toward nuanced opinions and outputs on complicated issues from the comfort of their home. And those things being scaled up by the US government would be just an incredible boon for democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roshan. I see Ryan has his hand up, and so we'll go over to Ryan.
Roshan, thanks for your comments. I thought those were great. Yeah, one thing that I've seen in supporting customer experience feedback across federal government is kind of the internal interface for that feedback. A lot of times feedback comes in a specific channel, and that channels aren't aligned to actually do anything about that feedback. And so ultimately, like, scoping the feedback such that like it will flow through the appropriate channel to actually get action, or figuring out a way to frankly operate more like a help desk where there's a active triaging of that feedback. Just too often the feedback is captured, the number goes up, fine, but there's no actually like typing, like what is the type of feedback and how does that align with the internal channels? I would love to see more exposure of internal business processes that then create like sort of avenues for specific types of feedback, because ultimately the goal isn't just about getting feedback, it's about synthesizing it and changing operations. So something about the impedance mismatch. How can we improve that?
Thank you, Ryan. I'm sure there's more that will come to folks as we go on, but I do want to transition into the next section so we can actually keep talking about some of the content that should go into this framework. And I will kick it over to Jen.
Great. Thank you so much, Shaivya. And again, thanks to all of you for being here today. Like many of you, I come from the world of open government, transparency, accountability, and democracy work. So I'm really thrilled to be with so many really critical pioneers in this space working on this issue domestically. So we're now going to shift into a conversations related to what we talked about, which was a little bit about the how and how the federal government has been engaging on this issue. And this is more about the what. So what goals and objectives, for example, should the OMB, Shaivya and her team be considering when they are developing this federal framework for public participation and community engagement? And then specifically, what types of content does this community think would be best to include? So that's on open government, that's on transparency, it's on reaching those marginalized communities, et cetera. But the content itself, what would be most useful as guidance? So let's kick it off. And Jennifer, I see your hand up.
Right now, the work that federal employees do is a part of public domain and is available to everybody. However, the federal government is doing contracts with vendors to do that research for them. And a lot of that work that is being done on behalf of the taxpayers are not in the public domain. So one of the things I would like to see OMB or anybody else, GSA, when they do have these contracts, to put a clause in there that any work done on behalf of the federal government, it may not be the work process, but the finished work is made available freely to the citizens as federal employees' work is done now.
Great, thank you for that, Jen. Stephen, I think you're up next.
Yes, thank you very much. Metrics. How do you measure what you want more of? Want more transparency? You're talking clarity. Is it clear to the public what's going on? And the only way to know that is to ask them. Are you confused? Is that clear? Do we explain it the right way? And put it on a 5-point scale or whatever you want to do, but ask them if they feel informed or if they're being, excluded from the process. Second thing with participation, same thing. Go to a meeting, say, hey, you're informed, but they didn't leave enough time to speak. I wish there was more time today. Anyway, but at the end of everything, there should be a survey that says, did you feel informed? On a scale from 1 to 5? Did you feel that you were engaged? Did you get to speak? That is, on a scale from 1 to 5. This is what OMB is actually doing with a customer experience. And so to me, it's just an overlap there. They're already going in that same direction. Ask people if they're satisfied with the experience they had, in this case, in public engagement. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Stephen, and thanks for those really specific, concrete methods and metrics and tools. Mark, I think you're up.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got 5 points, so let me run through them pretty quickly. The first thing is we've known this throughout the last 20 years, that the principal agent model that underlies how the federal government is structured and creates rules, regulations, and runs programs is really under threat by the internet and by the flow of information. So the question for me is, how do we get more responsive, and understanding that it's not a question about making things open. It really is a question about responsiveness. And can the principal agent model, where essentially government employees are supposed to be the experts, and the public believes, or the principals would believe that if they just let the government employee know what they think, that the government employee will do a good job. It just doesn't work that way. So I think we've got to get some more in depth on that. And I think the question has to be some big measure of success or measure of results, as was discussed before, that we ought to be able to quantify as a result of open government. What happens? Is it we find the audit report findings are addressed in a timely manner? Is it that people's votes on a certain regulation have now been incorporated and that's made public? We have to have some way to measure that. I don't know exactly what that is, but my third point would be the role of the IGs, GAO, and the audit community, that to make open government successful, we have to somehow see people being willing to listen to their critiques and the critiques having an impact. And I think the most obvious initial source of accountability is associated with the audit community. Fourth point is we are spending billions of dollars on marketing and communications. And I think most of that is to promote policies rather than having a two-way communication. And so my question is, what are you going to do about all the marketing spending that's being done? Is that going to be moved into here? And I think that leads to my fifth point, is changing the point of all the marketing spending to be the source of responsiveness, have communications and marketing not just be one way like it is in so many agencies, but really be a two-way street.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Yeah, I'm just going to add in one thing from my perspective on this issue from a global perspective. I separately also work for USAID, where I lead on this work internationally. And many of the issues that you raised right now around around the trust issue and the accountability piece, and really how we measure impacts on open government are things that are being discussed in that format. And I think this community has access to it. Would commend you to look at the kinds of conversations that are happening on that very topic of measuring the impact of open government work on citizen trust, on public outcomes. And it is sort of a moving target, but it is an evolving space. Michelle, I think you've been very patient. You've had your hand up. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this session. It's very interesting. I just have a quick comment, which is, it's one thing to have a whole bunch of different goals and objectives, but it's also important to coordinate them so that you're not having one person stepping on the toes of another person, especially when you're outsourcing some of the tasks. I have a tool. I don't have the time to present it now, but I do have a metric, a way of measuring these things, and a way of coordinating efforts by groups of people so that they really reach the right goal, that the more abstract goal of qualitatively where do they want to go. But I can talk to you about that maybe offline or something at another occasion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Alex, over to you.
Hello, everybody. I've been around long enough as an open government advocate here in DC to remember when the Obama White House was developing the public participation playbook with us and with our community and with dozens of people from across the federal government. And in some ways, the process was the product there. And I hope that you all will consider looking at that work, which is still contained within GSA, and updating that work in an ongoing way to make it a living document, and then to show people where our participation matters. Because when you talk about goals and objectives, I think that's the crucial one. There's lots of notice and comment rulemaking across government, but Americans might not think that our comments matter as much as the priorities of corporations, who are very well represented here in Washington and have experts to participate in these filings. But when you see something catch on and have the public weigh in with millions of comments, like on the issue of net neutrality, which this administration and FCC has finally moved on, you can get a sense of where consumer feelings, public opinions matter as much. So what I'd say in goals and objectives, think about how to rebuild trust and give us an opportunity to participate over time. And there's really great work across government that I hope you'll consider in updating that playbook, including for within GSA at challenge.gov, or the citizen science work, the wonderful work NASA does, and to think about how to build that in so that the people have lots of experience in this, in building trust over time on these participatory platforms, can create some shared facts around matters of great public interest, from climate change to whether the votes are being accurately counted and by whom, to which parts of governments we're paying money to or giving aid to and otherwise being engaged in, to immigration, and thinking about how the Department of Homeland Security's efforts in open government, which there's a great subcommittee which provided recommendations, could be leveraged around great public interest so that people have an understanding of what's occurring and what's being done in our name. And the objective should be improving participation, like getting past 70% voter participation and registering people, getting that out there as a nonpartisan objective, and giving people a sense that weighing into government matters. And I can say, go back to the future, bring back petitions, encourage Congress to do that. Look at what other countries do with respect to making petitions meaningful, like bringing a bill to the floor, or getting a rule introduced, or have an OMB propose a policy and tell people that our participation matters. Because right now there's endemic low trust, and there's been advanced truth decay in our country. And I know that the White House is acutely aware of this. So what I'd suggest to you is that you start using your bully pulpit, social media, radio, and more importantly, the presidential bully pulpit, to encourage Americans to participate and to show us when and where it matters. Because right now, I feel like that feedback loop is missing. And I encourage you all particularly to participate with respect to the feedback of the Good Governance Committee about this open government consultation and the plan itself. One of our pieces of feedback is that we need to revise the existing commitments and to add new ones for 2025. One of the ways you can build trust for us and our participation in bringing people back to a literal table is to show us that our feedback has mattered. And I encourage the people listening from the White House to weigh in on that on the public list that you've created, and show us that you are not just listening to us, but hearing. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And thanks for those very specific points, especially at the beginning where you were talking about some of the other examples across the federal government. And just a reminder that, of course, these are related issues, but today's listening session, we really want to make sure we're pulling those nuggets out for OMB as they are thinking about this federal framework, right? This is guidance for federal agencies and departments. Someone mentioned state and local earlier. That's part of the mix. Eventually, how do we engage all these stakeholders? So thanks for those specifics. Natalie, can I turn to you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to piggyback on some of the things that have already been said, meaning and highlighting that stakeholder engagement is not a new thing for the federal government, right? We've had mandates under the Evidence Building Act, President's Management Agenda, tons of OMB guidance saying that we have to engage stakeholders in our policymaking processes. So what I would argue is that as we think about what that mandate says and the decades-long efforts that we've put into all of this work, that there's a piece of this that's around educating and increasing awareness for agencies around what these methods are. I worry when we give a sense of like, we just need to get more people to the table, when what it actually is that these methods highlight different ways of engaging to make it easier and lower the bar for that. So what the Data Foundation that I'm a part of has done over our decade-long experience providing technical assistance and doing these stakeholder engagement experiences for evidence building, we created a toolkit. And we have found in our experiences with working with agencies that the toolkit creates this source of information on what are the different ways of doing engagement, because there's forums, there's forms, there's social media. And so it's not so much mandating one way of doing it, but it really is, as you think about this framework, also thinking about what the capacity building and the education around what stakeholder engagement could look like and what the opportunities are for agencies. So that'll be my comment. We have a toolkit. I'll post it in the chat. Happy to share and discuss further.
Thanks so much, Natalie. Those are excellent comments. We'd love to see that toolkit. I know MV would, and obviously you're coming with your experience, your prior federal experience as well. So you know well some of the capacity and knowledge constraints. So thanks so much for that. Well, this has been a really great touch point on content. I'm going to turn it over now to Dan York to walk us through some of your feedback on process. Again, we're going to loop back to that idea of bringing voices into this process who don't typically get to be part of it. Over to you, Dan.
Great, thank you. And thank you everyone who's spoken up so far. The question on the screen, you have the specific steps that OMB could take to involve the public, especially engaging members of underserved communities to ensure the collaborative and inclusive development of a federal framework for public participation, community engagement. So I'd love to hear folks' experience and thoughts on this process. We have our first hand up. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yes, thank you again. One thing to not repeat, do not repeat the process that the Obama administration did in the beginning of 2009, which was they asked everybody for best practices for public participation, all this stuff, and then they went silent for 6 months. And instead of putting out a draft of what they thought people were saying, they just went right to a final and issued the final, OMB that is, issued a final open government directive. So, which is like, well, that's not modeling engagement. They skipped over the part which federal agencies usually do with their regulations, which is to put out a draft for comment. And they were in such a rush, they went and they modeled the exact opposite of what they did. They were less engaging, more dismissive by skipping the step where you say, hey, what do you think of this draft? Did I capture their thoughts? So that's my thing. Whatever you're doing now, put out a draft or something else and have it be more regular. If we could have more sessions like this that are more, yes, collaborative instead of just listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Michelle, I believe you're up next.
I think that was a valuable point too about the feedback, because when we engage the public, we owe them to engage back again, right? It's a responsibility. I organized a citizens panel recently, and I realized the responsibility afterwards to give feedback. just a quick idea that a friend of mine had working in Mexico with indigenous communities. He thought of a bus that would go around because the indigenous people don't have the money to take a bus or taxi or whatever to the big city to find out what's happening. And some people in the United States don't have the money to travel to whatever, or have the computer technology, etc. But it was a sort of interactive bus that gave information, like a sort of, moving library or museum or something. And we would ask members of the communities to give us information, and then we would give back what progress we were making in the project. So it was a very nice, and we would circle around and come again, it wasn't a one-off thing. So that was a nice idea for very disadvantaged communities where, and a lot of the tools that we were using we were able to, we could use tools that for people that almost were illiterate, right? So the language barrier was overcome as well. So there are fun ideas like that that really help.
Great. We'll go to Daniel as well, and also invite folks that haven't talked yet to get in queue, because we'd love to hear everyone's feedback. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you so much. So 2 thoughts, and one of them is a bit of a rehash, and I apologize for the rehash. But the first thought is the concept of listening mode. Having gone through this process a number of times, there have been a series of, we're not in a position to talk with you, we're not in a position to help you refine ideas, but we're here in listening mode. And that's something that we heard a lot during the latter parts of the Obama administration, for example. And at least it's my experience, it's useful to have a conversation. And when it's listening mode, you can't tell if there's interest or disinterest. You can't have a conversation. It is one of the most frustrating things to hear, because you can't tell from the civil society side whether you are wasting your time or not. So, there was a comment earlier, like put out draft documents, that's useful. If there's something that doesn't work, it's useful to find out, well, that's an interesting idea, but we don't think we can do this for X, Y, and Z. And then you can help ideate in terms of finding a better way to accomplish something. Let this be a collaboration. And the second is, and this is a point that I've made before, so I will just make it briefly, build these things into the budget. We're in the process right now, the administration is, in figuring out the 2026 budget. From the outside, it's very difficult to understand who at OMB is actually responsible for these pieces. Make sure that those folks, whoever they are thinking through and building in the tools and the personnel and the structures to provide support for all these things that you're trying to do. If you don't have the money, if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the right people, then it's going to be very difficult to implement. So those would be my two recommendations for this piece. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll actually go to Catherine Foxhall next, because I apparently skipped her. I couldn't see her hand up from where I was. My apologies, Catherine. Please go ahead. Catherine, we can't hear you. Perhaps you're still on mute.
Thank you.
There we go.
After about 15 years of working on this, I have to be very direct. A number of years ago, put it in the range of 25 to 30, the federal agencies, along with a number of other people, started creating media policies that meant that employees could not speak to reporters without going through a process. Oftentimes, that on the face of it means that you can't have a confidential conversation with a reporter. And it often means that you don't talk to a reporter at all. This is extraordinarily anti-democratic, and as a public health reporter for many years, and someone who experienced the process before these restrictions were in place, there's always different information, a different viewpoint that is not going to come through the official avenues. When we bring this up, officials say things like, well, there are problems, and people might get the story wrong, and people might have their own agenda. Those, we agree, those are all problems. they just don't, they are not a drop in the bucket compared to a few people controlling the story, which is happening now. Many journalists like to think we get the story anyway. We often do not, and there is often the people who are very expert on a situation not being able to speak to a reporter. It's not just anti-democratic, it's creating massive vulnerabilities. If reporters had been walking around and speaking to people normally in CDC before the pandemic, it's very, very possible that some of the problems that occurred that we realized after the pandemic began would have been straightened out, even if it was only a specialized newsletter that got something that the rest of us would never have known about. So we went to the Obama administration. We talked to OSTP 2 years ago. It's like, you don't even respond. It's extraordinarily scary. And yes, these blockages are happening every day. So I appreciate a real concentration on this because it's a vulnerability. It's a huge vulnerability for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I remember talking to you briefly after the Transparency Caucus event, oh golly, a couple of weeks ago now. So thank you for continuing to raise this issue. Alex, I believe you're next.
Thank you. And it was great to see both of you there in Congress and have that conversation in public and in person again. And thanks especially to the Open Government Secretariat for all of your great work creating in-person meetings again that helped to rebuild the kind of interstitial relationships and trust that I think typified this space over a decade ago. And that's just really important work. And I want to recognize it right here because it's an important part of the collaborative, inclusive development of open government policies, procedures, et cetera. And you're modeling that. And I think that I'd love to see OMB learn from that and take the same approach. And you asked about engaging members of underserved communities. Well, look at where those people are and then find them. You know, a long time ago, I had an opportunity to speak to White House officials about this very issue. And there was a lot of interest in how we can do this online. And I think it's a both and in terms of figuring out how to do this offline. If you're going to help people to participate, you have to make sure they have sufficient media literacy, digital literacy, and civic literacy, and then have the time and capacity to comment and to participate in places that they can do so. And that means both synchronous and asynchronous communications. I'd love to see OMB think about how to engage the university systems of the country and the library systems of the country, because those kinds of navigators exist there. And then have the agencies reach out to relevant stakeholder groups and make sure that they get their people involved in a meaningful way. During the open government consultation in 2022, we had a White House session and there were people on it who didn't know what this was all about. They hadn't been given the briefing and the kind of ladder of engagement to give them the context to make the best possible use of that time. And what I'd say, if you want to do this framework, the process is the product. Look at how the public participation playbook was created in the first and second national action plans, and think about how to do that better. How to involve young people in interactive media, how to involve people who are retired and who might get their news from still TV or radio. Think about how to partner with public media and local civic media entities to make sure that people know about these opportunities. This session is a great example of a missed opportunity to use the bully pulpit of the White House to tell a much broader constituency, the press, about these opportunities too, because for a lot of good reasons, those are key infomediaries that exist for the American people. And I'd say also consider thinking about how to engage and involve the planetary scale tech platforms. Now, I know there's some very real reasons that people have discomfort, but a decade ago, we saw digital town halls with the president and cabinet level officials where they're taking questions from the American people. Imagine if the head of OMB was doing the same thing, if every head of the cabinet agencies were going back online and despite the challenges of that, then connecting that to offline change, showing people our participation matters, and then using the paired feedback loops of the press and the bully pulpit and partnerships with tech companies to make sure we're all aware of this. Because right now, this is all being stuck in the opacity of obscurity. And that's not where open government should be. And to make an effort against what you all care about, creating collective facts, raising public participation that's meaningful, and improving public trust, you're going to have to take different approaches. And that's going to mean taking a lot more risk in letting Americans actually know this stuff is happening. That means going to the briefing tables with the press and making sure they know. And right now, I don't see that happening within the agencies that are involved in this call. And I know that the best way to show good faith is to make sure that the people who follow the agencies the closest are the ones who know what you're doing in this way, and that you co-create these disclosure things with them. Thanks again for taking the time to take frank and honest feedback. I hope that you shift this into a responding session in a follow-up meeting that's scheduled.
Thank you, Alex. And at last, we do only have one time for one more. So I'll take Kivia, and then we'll move on to the next part of the agenda.
Thank you so much.
First, I say it right. Is it Kivia? Am I close?
So close. It's Kiva. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Good
I
try.
really
My
appreciate that. And Alexander, so many gems that you just shared, and you've really teed up my comments as well, so I may even condense them a little bit more. So I want to thank you all so much. I'm here with the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. And so I want to recommend, and just commend you all for taking the risk now to hold these listening sessions and to pursue this in general. And as we continue to develop this framework together, how do we really inform it with a series of focus groups I would like to invite you to consider? So, populations who have been historically excluded or marginalized, to gain insight on this framework's development, specifically people with disabilities, a range of younger folks, a range of older adults, people who are digitally disconnected, people who identify as Native. A second group I would invite you to consider is the departments who would actually be utilizing this framework, to get insight from them. Perhaps it's in the partial development, the half-baked phase. How would this actually land in their department, and get their feedback on, is this practical or is this just a paperweight? Not to say that that would be, but as someone who has over a decade of experience in this field of public engagement, sometimes that can happen. And a third area is with the national organizations who specialize in process and engagement, like NCDD. There's also National Civic League, who's represented here on the call. In the chat, there was a mention of Citizen University, as well as IEP2. So how can you get wisdom from these national networks on the practicality of this framework? And as we develop this framework, can we really provide a robust public feedback stage and provide ample time to give feedback on the development and the implementation of this framework, including multiple methods like Alexander mentioned, hybrid, both the virtual engagement, can we even host an in-person opportunity, perhaps regionally in specific areas of the country? I think that this would really provide a more robust and informed framework. And then as we move forward, how do we keep this framework active? And like our democracy, it's going to continue to evolve. And I think that just would make it even more of a stronger effort, and it is not a weakness to have to continue to evolve things. It is a strength. So thank you again for this opportunity and for listening.
No, and I really do appreciate your comments and thoughts. In fact, everyone's comments and thoughts, there's a lot for us to take down. And I'm very happy that we'll have the transcripts, because there's a lot to read through and hear. And with that, I don't know if there's a slide on this. We shall see. Not yet. So I will stop sharing, and I will pass it to Jennifer with OSTP to give us some larger context.
Great, thanks. So again, I have the unique pleasure of serving both in this role at the White House on the Open Gov agenda, but also am coming to this field. I'm just 1 month in with almost 9 years of experience working on Open Gov from the international context. So at USAID and with our partners at state and GSA, we are supporting the Open Government Partnership and implementation at the global level, and then implementation at the country level around the world. Heard the Mexico example very loud and clear and was smiling because we have been able to support work like that on community engagement in many places around the world, and there is lots to learn in both directions, actually. And I'll just take a moment here to plug that as part of Open Gov Week later this month, we hope to be showcasing some of these examples here in the US and connecting it to that broader context, because this is a continuum. Many of you, I think, are involved in both of these spaces, and there is learning to be had in both directions. So just wanted to raise again the importance of open government in the global context, underscore that openness is not the end, it is the means around accountability, citizen engagement, citizen participation, and ultimately citizen trust. It is the basis upon which all these others grow, and in the basis upon which we strengthen our own democracies. And so in that vein, I just wanted really to tie these efforts that were underfoot, have been underway for some time, under Shaibia's leadership and Sam's leadership at OMB, to the work that is happening at the global level. Many of you are aware of the Open Gov Challenge that Dan mentioned at the outset. This is really exciting. It's a way for the global initiative to focus its work squarely on that move from openness as being the goal to the application of that, what it means in real human lives in terms of democracy delivering for people around the world. And so in that light, there are 10 challenge areas that the OGP at the global level is challenging its members at the national level, at the subnational level, local jurisdictions, to take on ambitious new reforms in these spaces. And one of them is on citizen engagement, public engagement. So this is a really fantastic opportunity to align these federal efforts with these global efforts to really show the importance of this high quality and inclusive participation. You've given us a lot to think about. I know the OMB scribes are typing all of that up, and you have an opportunity to provide a lot more detail in your written comments. I'll just say that there was a comment made earlier about bringing in many of your organizations and making sure that that is an inclusive process. I'll just say that the partnership model, the beauty of OGP and the open government sort of agenda is that it is a partnership. And so of course, there's a role for accountability and watchdog, and that adversarial relationship needs to be in some amount of tension. But we're also relying on all of you to get the word out about this RFI, about these opportunities to participate amongst your networks, because there's only so many people that the people on this call may know. And so getting that word out and helping us share that opportunity is going to be really important. Before I move back to Dan to close us out, I just wanted to open it up. We actually amazingly have about 3 minutes. If anyone has any final parting thoughts for things we should be considering as we close out today's listening session, we'd love to hear it. Yes, Jennifer.
Please tell me you're going to give more money to data.gov. They were given a mandate, and there's only 3 people who work there for the whole federal government. Please give them more money.
Great, thank you. I hope someone wrote that down. Anything else? Any other parting thoughts? I would love to hear from folks who have not had a chance to say something today. I see a few names here that I didn't hear pop up. Lorelei, are you raising your hand?
Oh, hi, yeah. Hi, can you hear me? Thank you for this. This is awesome. I would just say I know that there's, the executive branch and the first branch are sort of frenemies, but Congress is already a distributed network that's the code switcher between local communities and the federal government. They are 900 offices around the United States. They know who participates in good faith, despite the 3-ring circus and the dysfunction we're seeing. Every member of Congress has to do a lot of interfacing with people they represent on the ground. And there really is a wasteland in there between sort of the old 19th century field hearing model and town halls, which are scary and unproductive these days. So there's a huge demand pull for this and experimentation. And I know there's probably a way to do this that allows this to be a whole of government effort is what I'm saying. And so please, and there's been real interest in that because of the Modernization Committee in Congress. About 5 of the recommendations in Congress and the House side were about new forms of engagement, participation, and meaningful inclusion in lawmaking. So anyway, just don't forget Congress. I know it's ornery, but it's really would be productive if we can figure out a way to make this go across the branches. Thanks.
Thanks so much. That's an excellent observation. Any final salvos here, final remarks before I pass this to Dan? Just want to make sure everyone feels like if they had something to say, they got a chance to say it.
I have just one quick thing, which is to, on the call for nominations for members of the Federal Advisory Committee, please remove the requirement to include someone else's resume or CV. There's tons of people who I could think of nominating, but I don't have a CV or resume for that person. And I'm sure it wouldn't be the right version that they would have me share, even if I could find it online. So please consider removing that. I think you'll get more and better quality recommendations.
Thanks so much. Well, I'm about to hand you over to the man who's in charge of that. So over to you, Dan. Thanks so much for all your participation today.
No, thank you for the recommendation there. We talked to our CMS folks here and see what's permissible. I also want to thank everyone for attending today and remind folks that this isn't the only way to participate. We have actually, we just mentioned the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee Q&A a week from tomorrow on the 10th. So you can register for and see that. Responses to the PPCE RFI are due the 17th. DOJ's FOIA business framework is open for comment on the Federal Register through 17th. Of course, we've got the phase one. Actually, I'll share my screen so you can see the slide that Shavia put together as well. There we go. On the May 21st, right? We have the evaluation.gov. All that stuff is due, as well as the challenge.gov. It will be out there as well. And so there's a number of ways that folks can participate with the things going on right now, but also coming down the pike. And so I want to thank the White House, OMB, all of our great points of contact over there that have helped us in partnering this effort. Thank you to Shavia and her team, who I know have done a monstrous amount of work to collect all the feedback across within government, outside government, state locals, and others. Thank you to my team for helping me look good, because Lord knows they are behind the scenes making all this happen. And thank all of you for taking the time to come to talk to us, to give us your experiences and understandings, so we can help put together the best possible product. So thank you. I will tip my invisible hat, and with that, I will call this over. Thank you all.